Usually, when we talk about a map, there's this underlying expectation of safety.
Right.
Like, navigation implies a destination. You know, you're lost in the woods, you pull out a topographic map, and it shows you the elevation, the river, the trail, and the guide just points and says, you know, there's the way out.
Yeah, it provides this strictly bounded relationship between where you currently stand and, well, where you ostensibly need to be.
Exactly.
It creates this artificial but obviously highly useful sense of order.
Because you are lost, or you are found. It's clean, it's directional.
But that cleanliness is exactly the illusion we are here to dismantle today.
Yeah.
Because we desperately prefer things to be visible, categorized. And most importantly, we want to know exactly where the finish line is.
We want the absolute foundation.
We crave a foundational reality. But when you step into the world of advanced Buddhist ontology, that map doesn't just fail to guide you, it basically bursts into flames in your hand.
Which brings us to today. Welcome to a brand new deep dive. And just right off the bat, we are skipping the foundational 11-step Madhyamaka reasoning today.
Yeah, you guys already know that.
Right, because since you have already spent extensive time studying Nāgārjuna's Mūlamadhyamakakārikā with us, you know the mechanics of dependent origination.
You know how to deconstruct inherent existence.
Exactly. Because you've already done that heavy lifting. We aren't going to hold your hand through the basics of emptiness today. We are jumping straight into the deep end.
Which is really necessary given the sheer density of the source text we're unpacking today.
Oh, absolutely.
It is titled The True Nature of Nirvana and the Limitless Fractal Karmic Cycle. And it is, it's poetic, it is paradoxical, and it is entirely unrelenting in its demand that we abandon not just our ignorance, but our most cherished, hard-won spiritual maps.
I was reading through the first few sections, and honestly, if you thought Nirvana was an escape hatch, like a final static resting place where you just float on a cloud of eternal cessation, prepare to have your mind blown.
Yeah, this text completely annihilates that framework.
It totally redefines the entire end game of practice. It takes everything we commonly assume about the goal of spiritual life and demands that we look directly at the territory, not the blueprint.
And it demands an intimacy with reality that is deeply uncomfortable for the intellect.
For sure.
Because it's one thing to say, I need to stop clinging to my anger. It is an entirely different, structurally terrifying thing to hear a text say, you need to start clinging to your conceptual framework of liberation itself.
But before we can even begin to redefine nirvana, the text kind of forces us to confront exactly what is blocking us from experiencing it right now.
Right.
And it doesn't mince words at all. It diagnoses a specific structural, fatal flaw of the human intellect. And it anchors this diagnosis in the old adage, the map is not the territory.
And the author takes that adage to its absolute logical extreme.
They really do.
The fatal flaw identified here is our habitual, almost involuntary reflex of mistaking our concepts for reality itself.
Yeah, the text lists them exhaustively, like our dyads, triads, quads, cycles, views, analogies, models, hypotheses, and theories.
All of them. We build these conceptual architectures to navigate the phenomenal world, which, to be clear, is a perfectly valid conventional activity.
Right, you need them.
But then a cognitive slippage occurs. We forget they are just models.
We fall in love with the blueprint and refuse to walk into the actual house.
Actually, it's worse than that. We fall in love with the blueprint, and then we try to live inside the blueprint, and we get furious when it doesn't protect us from the rain.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
The text outlines this highly specific, tragic life cycle that the intellect forces upon these concepts. First, we co-create them. They don't exist out there in the ether waiting to be discovered. They're dependently co-arisen through language and culture.
Yeah.
Then we select the ones that flatter our biases. Then comes the fatal step. We reify them.
Let's pause on that word, actually, reify, because it's doing a lot of heavy lifting here. We are taking a concept which is fluid, empty, and dependently originated, and we inject it with this phantom substance. We assign it Svabhāva.
Inherent existence.
Right, inherent existence.
Precisely. We treat an abstraction as if it has independent, solid, self-sustaining reality. And once we reify a concept, the emotional life cycle kicks in.
Yeah, we become deeply attached to it. It becomes part of our identity.
And ultimately, as the text points out, we go to war over it.
That progression really struck me. I mean, we've talked extensively about prapanka, conceptual proliferation when we covered the MMK.
Sure.
You know how the mind multiplies concepts like a virus? But what this text brings to the forefront is the deeply emotional, fiercely combative nature of these fabrications.
Yeah, we don't just invent a concept, we wrap our entire ego around it and build a fortress. Because if the map is reified, any challenge to the map feels like a mortal threat to our actual existence. This is the root of sectarianism, dogmatism, and frankly, a vast amount of historical and interpersonal violence. The intellect creates a model of how the universe works or what nirvana is.
And because that model is a product of dependent origination, co-arisen, co-defined, and co-imputed by the mind, it is fundamentally empty.
Exactly, empty. The text explicitly describes all these frameworks as being like illusions, mirages, or echoes. They are there, yet not there.
Okay, I have to push back here, or at least play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
If we inherently know, especially as practitioners who have studied emptiness, that these maps are just mirages, why is the cognitive bias for them so overwhelmingly strong?
That's the big question.
But why do we voluntarily choose the mirage over reality? I was thinking about it like staring at a GPS screen while driving. You're barreling down a mountain highway, arguing aggressively with your passengers about the color of the digital road on the little screen, completely ignoring the actual beautiful, terrifying scenery flying by outside the window. Why do we prefer the digital screen to the real world?
Well, I wouldn't say that analogy completely captures the mechanics of what's happening, because a GPS screen is still just a representation of a fixed physical road.
Fair enough.
The reality the text is pointing to the territory isn't a fixed road at all. It is limitless, fluid, and entirely groundless.
So it's way scarier than a mountain road.
Exactly. We cling to maps because we are utterly terrified of groundlessness. The map gives us the illusion of control. It gives us boundaries.
Right.
The intellect cannot function without boundaries. It needs to say, this is me and that is you, or this is pure and that is impure.
So the clinging isn't just a mistake. It's basically a survival mechanism for the ego.
Exactly. It's an ontological defense mechanism. And this raises an incredibly dangerous question about advanced spiritual practice. Are we using our philosophies to actually engage with the wildness of reality? Or are we just building a more sophisticated, holy-sounding GPS system to hide behind?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we follow that logic all the way down, even a high-level philosophical framework like Madhyamaka itself, the very reasoning of emptiness that we spend so much time on can become a trap.
It absolutely can.
If we reify the concept of emptiness into some new absolute truth or ultimate ground, rather than seeing it as a relatively efficient tool to deconstruct falsehoods, we've just built another map.
Right.
We've taken the medicine and turned it into a new poison.
That is precisely what the text is warning against. Emptiness is not a substance. It is not a place you go. If you reify emptiness, you've constructed an elaborate, intellectually satisfying cage.
Wow.
All frameworks are dependently co-arisen and empty. They are useful, highly useful, but they are never the territory itself. They are never tathate, reality as it is.
Okay, so if our fundamental flaw is clinging to maps, we have to look at the biggest, most heavily defended map of all in the Buddhist tradition, which is the concept of nirvana itself.
Yeah, this is where it gets really radical.
The text spends a significant amount of time dismantling what I would call the extinction myth. It systematically tells us exactly what nirvana is not. And first on the list, nirvana is not finding a superior set of concepts.
Which is devastating for the intellectual practitioner.
Seriously.
It destroys the hope that if you just read enough texts or formulate the perfect conceptual synthesis, you will achieve awakening. Awakening isn't an A+ on a cosmic theology exam. It isn't a master map.
But the next part is even more radical, I think. It says nirvana is crucially not the rejection of thinking, feeling, moving, or talking.
Right.
It is not the rejection of samsara. There is no ultimate goal, and there is no final cessation or extinction of samsara.
Let's pause and dissect the mechanics of that, because it fundamentally challenges a lot of mainstream, particularly early Buddhist interpretations of liberation.
Yeah, big time.
Often, nirvana is presented as a state of nirodha, a literal blowing out of the flame.
A cessation.
Right, a complete final withdrawal from the messy, painful, noisy engine of samsara. But this source insists that nirvana is not a retreat into an unfeeling, unthinking void.
It totally shatters the dualistic idea that samsara is this fundamentally broken place we have to escape, and nirvana is this pristine sanctuary we get to flee to. The text states incredibly clearly, there is nothing to purify in absolute terms. Nothing.
In absolute terms is the critical qualifier there.
Yeah.
Because if samsara and nirvana were inherently different, they would require inherent existence, which we know is impossible.
Right, because of dependent origination.
Exactly. Mistaking the map of nirvana as an escape for reality is just another way of missing the inconceivable reality as it is.
So it's just another map.
Just another map. If you believe you have to destroy your thoughts to be enlightened, you are reifying your thoughts as inherently bad or impure. You are still playing the dualistic game.
I have to challenge this, though, because, I mean, if there is no final awakening, if there is no grand finish line where you get handed a cosmic certificate and never have to deal with anger or grief or rush hour traffic ever again, why are we doing this?
It's a fair question.
Isn't the prospect of an endless, non-terminating samsara utterly exhausting?
I see why it sounds exhausting, but that exhaustion is based on a false premise.
How so?
Well, the exhaustion you feel in daily life doesn't come from the raw phenomena of the world. It doesn't come from the traffic or the grief itself.
Right.
No. The exhaustion comes from the constant Herculean effort of maintaining your maps, defending your conceptual boundaries, and resisting the natural flux of reality.
Oh, wow.
The text provides a direct counter to this fear. It says, nirvana is putting down the burden.
Putting down the burden of maintaining the map.
Exactly. When the text says the path is the goal, it isn't just offering a comforting platitude. It means structurally there is no finish line to cross. We are learning how to dance within the flux.
I love that.
Dancing isn't about getting to a specific spot on the floor and stopping right.
Right.
It's about the joyous engagement with the movement itself. It is deeply relieving, not exhausting, to finally stop fighting reality's groundlessness.
That makes a lot of sense. The friction is what causes the exhaustion, not the movement itself.
Exactly.
So if nirvana isn't an escape from samsara, and it isn't an extinction of thought or feeling, then what are the mechanics of it? The text transitions from negative definitions, what nirvana isn't, to a vibrant, highly active description of how a realized mind engages with reality.
And it's a very specific kind of engagement.
Yeah, it says nirvana is transcending all arbitrary boundaries, all extremes, and all dualistic conceptual proliferations in absolute terms.
And we must emphasize that phrase again in absolute terms,
Right.
because the text immediately pairs it with a crucial caveat. You transcend these extremes without completely rejecting useful, valid, conventional, or consensual truths, methods, goals, tools, and adapted skillful means.
It repeats that so many times, without completely rejecting useful, valid, conventional truths. It feels like the author is highly aware that the moment you tell a practitioner all boundaries are arbitrary, they're going to immediately veer into sheer nihilism.
Oh, it's the classic Madhyamaka guardrail.
Yeah.
The text gives us a massive list of the extremes we must transcend: objectivism, realism, materialism, subjectivism, idealism, solipsism, nihilism, dualism, pluralism, processism, relationism, monism, and oneness.
I want to stop on that last one, actually.
Right.
Oneness.
Right.
Because in so many spiritual circles, achieving a state of oneness is considered the absolute pinnacle of enlightenment. But this text lumps it in with solipsism and nihilism as an extreme to be transcended. How does all is one qualify as an extreme?
Well, think about the mechanics of language. To assert all is one, you are still asserting a conceptual boundary.
Oh, I see.
You are defining one in opposition to many. You are taking the limitless, indescribable flux and forcing it into a singular, monolithic conceptual box.
So it's still a map.
It is absolutely still a map. It is still an attempt by the intellect to freeze reality so it can be comprehended. Nirvana is not oneness. Nirvana is simply samsara viewed with a different pair of non-dual glasses.
Right.
It is ceasing to freeze the river. But again, you do this without throwing away your conventional tools. You are transmuting ignorance avidya into wisdom praja without grasping at the duality of those two states.
I was trying to map this onto a daily experience because the Buddha himself never taught anything in absolute terms. Right?
Oh, no, only adapted skillful means.
Right. The raft is for crossing the river. You don't
Yeah.
carry it on your back once you reach the other shore. So applying this idea of transcending absolutes while maintaining conventional truths, I thought about the concept of money.
Okay.
Realizing ultimate truth is like realizing that fiat currency, paper bills, digital numbers on a screen has absolutely no inherent absolute value. It's just a socially agreed upon illusion. But you still use it to buy groceries. You don't burn your wallet in a fire of spiritual awakening just because you understand the macroeconomic reality that money is empty of inherent existence.
That's a highly practical analogy, yeah, though we should be careful not to reduce emptiness to mere social constructivism. But the mechanism of your analogy holds.
Right.
You don't burn the wallet. You just stop worshiping the wallet. You stop believing the wallet is the ultimate source of your safety, your identity, or your salvation. You use the conventional truth of money to function in the consensual reality of society, but your mind is totally free from the absolute grip of it.
The psychological freedom this brings is staggering.
It really is.
It means you don't have to quit your corporate job, shave your head, and flee to a remote cave to find nirvana. You can engage fully in your conventional life, you can pay your mortgage, you can raise your kids, while simultaneously abiding in reality as it is tathata.
Exactly.
You can perceive everything as primordially equal and pure, while still choosing to stop at a red light. Because conventionally, getting hit by a truck hurts.
You are operating in two registers simultaneously. You see the boundaries required to play the game of conventional life, but you never for a second believe those boundaries possess Svabhāva.
Right.
You cease to oppose, in absolute terms, self and other, pure and impure, salutary and unsalutary. You realize there is nothing to purify in absolute terms, which ironically frees you to act with immense compassion and grace in the conventional world.
Okay, let's look under the hood of that action.
Yeah.
How does this non-dual vision translate into the actual mechanical movement of our bodies, our speech, our decisions?
The source gets very detailed here.
It does. It provides what I can only describe as a highly specific operational manual for how a realized mind acts in the world. And it starts with a paradoxical phrase, acting without acting.
Yeah, acting without acting sounds like a Taoist oxymoron, but it perfectly encapsulates this dual register. It means acting conventionally without acting in absolute terms.
Right.
It is acting without attachment, without reification, and critically, without absolute effort.
And the text says this requires acting in accord with the middle way. And here is where it demands we apply the tetralemma.
Yes, the classic four corners.
Right. We must be free from all extremes, like asserting it is this or it is non-this, and also free from the middle, like asserting it is both or it is neither.
The tetralemma is crucial here. Let's walk through the mechanics of it.
Let's do it.
Normally when we act, we assume a solid agent, me acting upon a solid object, the world. If we apply the tetralemma to the self that is acting, first, we don't say the self exists inherently.
Right.
Second, we don't swing to nihilism and say the self does not exist at all. Yeah. Third, we don't say it both exists and doesn't exist. And fourth, we don't say it neither exists nor doesn't exist.
So you just don't land anywhere.
Exactly. You refuse to land on any of those four conceptual nodes. You stay completely in motion. Your action arises dynamically from the flux without a reified actor taking credit for it.
And the text says this fluid action is achieved by embodying a series of what it calls unions. Now, I read this list, and there are so many acronyms it looks like a corporate flowchart for ultimate reality.
It is a bit of an alphabet soup, yes.
It lists the union of the two truths, U2T, the union of the three spheres, U3S, the union of opposites, UOP, the union of the two truths about the two truths, U2TTT,
yeah,
the union of the ground and its manifestations, UGM, the union of the three kayas, U3K, and the union of the individual, collective, and cosmic, U3L.
It is a dense list, but every single one of those unions represents a specific mechanism for dismantling dualism in daily action. We shouldn't just list them. We really need to unpack how they mechanically function.
Right, let's break them down.
Let's start with the union of the three spheres, the U3S. This is intensely practical.
The three spheres being the agent, the action, and the object.
Correct. Let's say you are giving money to someone in need. Conventionally, there is a giver, which is you, the gift, which is the money, and the receiver. If you act with reification, you solidify all three. You think, I am a generous person giving my solid money to this poor person.
Right, which creates a huge ego trip.
You have immediately created a hierarchy, an ego trip, and an absolute boundary between you and them. Embodying the U3S means you perform the exact same conventional action, you hand over the money, but your mind perceives the utter emptiness of the giver, the gift, and the receiver.
So you see them all as dependently co-arising.
Yes. They are mutually co-arising mirages. The action happens, but the actor isn't burdened by it.
That makes perfect sense. What of the union of the two truths, the U2T? We know the two truths are conventional truth, dependent origination, and ultimate truth, emptiness.
Yes, the classic formulation form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. But the text takes it a step further with the U2T2T.
The union of the two truths about the two truths.
Exactly. This is essentially meta-emptiness. It means you don't even hold on to the concept of conventional and ultimate as absolute realities.
Wait, really?
Yes. If you think the ultimate truth is somehow more real or higher than the conventional truth, you are still trapped in dualism. You've just created a new hierarchy. The U2TTT is the realization that the distinction between the two truths is itself only conventionally true.
That is mind-bending. The framework we use to dismantle reality is itself just a conventional tool.
Exactly. And this brings us to the union of the three kayas, the U3K, which explains how a realized being manifests in the world.
The three kayas being the Dharmakaya, the Sambhogakaya, and the Nirmanakaya.
Right. The Dharmakaya is the truth body, the unmanifest absolute. The Sambhogakaya is the enjoyment body, the realm of pure, subtle form. And the Nirmanakaya is the emanation body, the physical manifestation in the gross world.
Okay.
Embodying the U3K means your physical actions, your Nirmanakaya, are perfectly aligned with your subtle, compassionate intentions, your Sambhogakaya. And all of this is arising effortlessly from the unmanifest groundlessness of emptiness, the Dharmakaya.
So there's no friction.
You aren't split. Your physical action isn't rebelling against your spiritual understanding.
But I'm going to challenge the practicality of this for a second. Let's bring this down to earth. I understand the U3S and not reifying the giver and receiver, but how do you act without acting when your boss is screaming at you or when you are facing a massive injustice?
Okay, good question.
Because if you see the boss, the yelling, and yourself as totally empty, doesn't that just lead to passivity? Don't you just become a doormat because nothing is inherently real anyway?
That is the most common misunderstanding of emptiness, and it's exactly why the text insists we do not reject conventional truths. Emptiness does not mean non-existence. It means lack of inherent independent existence.
Right?
If your boss is yelling at you, the conventional reality is that a boundary is being violated. Passivity is actually a form of nihilism. It's rejecting the conventional reality of the harm.
So how does the realized mind respond?
By acting conventionally without absolute effort, you assert the boundary, you say, do not speak to me that way, or you quit the job, or you fight the injustice. But, and here is the U3S in action again, you do it without reifying the boss as an inherently evil monster, and without reifying yourself as an inherently victimized self. The friction, the exhaustion we feel in those conflicts comes from the massive narrative weight we attach to them.
Yeah, we think, this is my identity. This is my ultimate worth being attacked.
Exactly. Acting without acting means you simply do what conventionally needs to be done, but you drop the absolute narrative. You defend the boundary without hating the transgressor because you see their anger is dependently originated too.
You drop the raft.
Yeah.
You use the tool, the firm boundary, the language of the conflict, but you are free from the absolute belief in it.
Yes. Because you are free from these absolutes, the text says you are free to evolve beyond our actual karma. You are doomed to repeat your reactive angry patterns because you are no longer fueling them with absolute belief.
Wow.
You are responding to what is actually happening, not to the terrifying map you've drawn of what is happening.
Free to evolve beyond our actual karma. That fluidity is a perfect bridge to the next major section of the text. We've talked deeply about how to act within reality, but how does the source describe the nature of reality itself?
This is where it gets really fun.
What is the actual environment in which this non-dual action takes place? Because if reality isn't a fixed map, what is it?
This is where the text's language shifts dramatically. It moves away from traditional negative descriptions of emptiness and attempts to describe the indescribable.
And he uses quite the phrase.
It calls reality an indescribable, fluid, nonlinear, continuous, limitless, centerless, holographic, fractal, karmic cycle, and flux.
I have to laugh because it starts with indescribable and then instantly deploys 9 incredibly evocative, highly specific adjectives to try and describe it.
It's trying its best.
But the choice of words is fascinating. It says everything is conditioned by and conditioning everything else. Nothing is discrete in nature, space, or time. Nothing is well delimited or categorized.
It is attempting to update the language of dependent origination for a mind that thinks in systems. Words like holographic, fractal, and nonlinear are modern scientific metaphors, but they map with astonishing precision onto ancient Madhyamaka ontology.
Let's break those specific metaphors down mechanically because they are so central to this new framing. Why fractal?
Well, in mathematics, a fractal is a complex pattern where every part at any scale exhibits the same structural characteristics as the whole. The Mandelbrot set is the classic example.
Like infinite zoom.
You can zoom into a tiny fraction of the image and you will see the exact same infinitely complex shapes as you do when you zoom out to the entirety of it.
The part contains the whole, and the whole is reflected in the part.
Exactly. Now, apply that mathematically to the concept of dependent origination in karma. It means that the infinite web of causality isn't just a massive external net that you are caught inside. The macrocosm of universal karma and the microcosm of your momentary mental state are fractally identical. Every single thought you have is conditioned by the entire history of the universe, and every single thought you have subtly conditions the entire trajectory of the universe.
That is heavy.
They are empty relata connected by empty relations. The boundary between the macro universe and your micro consciousness is an arbitrary map.
And what about holographic? Because usually when people hear hologram, they think of a sci-fi projection, an illusion that isn't really there, which sounds a bit like Prapanyeka, but I don't think that's how the text is using it.
No, it's not using it to mean fake. It's referring to the physical mechanics of an optical hologram.
How does that work?
In traditional photography, if you take a negative of a photograph and cut it in half, you lose half the image. But a holographic plate records the interference patterns of light from multiple angles.
Oh, interesting.
Because of how that information is distributed, if you take a holographic plate and shatter it into 100 pieces and shine a laser through just one tiny shard, you don't get a fragment of the image, you get the entire image.
Wait, really?
Yeah. It might be slightly lower resolution, but the whole is completely contained within every single piece.
Wow. So by calling the karmic flux holographic, the text is basically updating the ancient metaphor of Indra's net.
Precisely. Indra's net is the cosmic web where at every intersection there is a jewel, and every jewel reflects all the other jewels perfectly. The holographic metaphor points to the profound, inescapable intimacy of the universe.
Right.
The entire universe is a centerless, limitless cycle, and you're not just a tiny, isolated cog in a massive machine. The entirety of the interdependent web is structurally present in your awareness right now.
The text describes the universe as an endless dance of creation, bondage, and awakening. A boundless web with zero inherent beginning and zero inherent center. An ocean of conditioning without anything substantial in it. But I have to be honest here. As beautiful as the math and the physics metaphors are, when you really try to internalize the reality of it, it is terrifying.
Oh, absolutely.
If there is no center, no beginning, and no end, it induces a kind of ontological vertigo. It feels like we're just floating out in deep, dark space without a tether, without a spacesuit, without a ship.
And it absolutely should feel that way. That vertigo you are experiencing is the sensation of your ego desperately reaching for a handhold and realizing there is nothing to grab onto. It is profound groundlessness.
It's dizzying.
The text doesn't shy away from this. It confirms bluntly there is no ultimate foundation or ground. There is no bedrock.
It's a turtles all the way down, except there are no turtles.
Exactly. We are deeply conditioned to look for the bedrock. Even in advanced spiritual practice, we often just swap out our conventional bedrock for spiritual bedrock.
Right, like trying to find the ultimate truth.
We deconstruct our daily ego, but then we look for the true self, or the cosmic consciousness, or even emptiness itself, hoping that will be our new foundation. We want to land somewhere.
But the text says no. Reality continually oscillates between poles. It is an oscillating loop of interdependence.
There is no anchor. You have to be okay with groundlessness. You have to learn to swim in the ocean of conditioning without needing a piece of driftwood to hold on to.
Because if you look for it...
If you look for a foundation in a fractal holographic flux, you will suffer because you are looking for a fixed point in a system defined by infinite relation.
An ocean of conditioning without anything substantial in it?
Yeah.
That is both the most terrifying and the most liberating thing I've ever heard. Because if there's no ground...
Yeah.
You can't fall.
That is the ultimate liberation. You cannot fall out of the universe. You cannot fall out of dependent origination.
Okay, so just as we are getting comfortable with this beautiful, poetic, slightly terrifying idea of a holographic fractal flux.
Just as you're settling in.
Right. Just as we are settling into the idea that this groundlessness is the ultimate truth of the universe, the source delivers a sudden, razor-sharp warning. It's almost funny how perfectly the author anticipates what the human intellect is going to do with this beautiful poetry.
The author knows the intellect's fatal flaw perfectly. It's the exact same flaw we diagnosed at the very beginning of this discussion.
Yes. The text explicitly warns, if you make flux your new absolute Svabhāva, you've missed the point entirely.
This is the ultimate danger of spiritual materialism, laid bare. It is the final trap for the advanced practitioner.
It's a philosophical booby trap.
Yeah.
You spend years studying the MMK, you deconstruct reality, you realize everything is empty, you read this text, you grapple with the science metaphors, and you finally say, aha, I've got it. The ultimate reality is a centerless, holographic, fractal flux.
And you feel so smart.
You feel like you finally understand the universe.
Yeah.
And just as you plant your flag of victory on top of the flux, the universe taps a sign right next to you that says, the map is not the territory.
It is a brilliant, necessary trap. Let's analyze the mechanics of what happens in that aha moment.
Let's do it.
The moment we conceptualize the limitless, centerless flux and declare it to be the ultimate truth, what have we done?
We've made a map.
We have just created a new absolute concept. We have taken the very idea of groundlessness and we have turned it into a ground. We have assigned Svabhāva inherent existence to the concept of flux itself.
Right.
We have frozen the river again just to take a picture of it and say, look, I understand the river.
We took this vibrant, indescribable, terrifying reality and stuffed it into a brand new, highly sophisticated, spiritually advanced little box. We did exactly what the text told us not to do on page 1.
Precisely. And this loops perfectly back to the beginning. This is what it means to be free from conditioned, dualistic, conceptual proliferations. You cannot rest your mind anywhere, not even on the concept of non-resting.
Okay.
You engage with the beautiful web, you embrace the flux, you act with the unions of compassion and wisdom, but you absolutely refuse to put a label on it and call it ultimate truth.
You transcend all descriptions, even the description of flux.
Yes. The word flux is merely a conventional tool. It's a heuristic device used by the author to point your mind toward suchness. It is a finger pointing at the moon.
Right.
But if you start worshiping the word flix, if you start writing doctrines about the absolute reality of the fractal hologram, you are just staring at the finger. You've missed the moon entirely. You must transcend all descriptions and differentiating causality without rejecting them conventionally. You use the word flux to break your attachment to stasis, and then you drop the word flux.
So, synthesizing this massive journey we've been on today, we started by diagnosing the fatal flaw of the intellect. Our desperate, survival-driven need to cling to maps, reify concepts, and go to war over them.
Yeah.
From there, we use the text to completely dismantle the extinction myth of nirvana. It's not an escape hatch, it's not the cessation of thought or feeling, and certainly not a final resting place away from samsara.
Instead, it is transcending arbitrary boundaries in absolute terms, while continuing to use them as skillful means in conventional reality. It is putting down the burden of maintaining your maps.
Right. We explored what that looks like mechanically in action. The tetralemma, acting without acting, embodying the unions like the 3 spheres and the 3 kayas, and we can use the tools of the world without being enslaved by the belief that they are inherently real.
Exactly.
We dove into the deep, groundless space of reality itself, this indescribable, centerless, holographic, fractal dance of karma. And finally, we dodged the ultimate trap, learning that we cannot turn that very dance into a new absolute foundation, a new Svabhāva.
The ultimate takeaway for you as a practitioner navigating your daily life is permission. The text gives you permission to stop exhausting yourself.
That's a beautiful way to phrase it.
When you feel overwhelmed by the rigid boxes of your daily life, your conflicts, your anxieties, your need to figure everything out and find the bedrock, remember that you can just put the map down. You don't have to defend the mirage. You can look directly at the territory. You can engage with the suchness of the present moment exactly as it is without demanding that it fit your expectations or your spiritual theories.
You can just embrace the flux. You can dance without needing to know where the edge of the dance floor is because there is no edge.
And you do this not by escaping your life into some meditative void, but by sinking fully, fractally into the interdependent reality of it, entirely free from the burden of absolutes.
Which brings us to a final lingering thought for you to take away today. The text has painted this incredible, mechanically precise picture of a centerless fractal dance where you are an active participant. But think about this. If there is truly no center, no absolute foundation, no ultimate goal, and no inherent boundary between you and the rest of the holographic universe, what happens to the idea of the dancer themselves?
That is the question.
If you are fully participating in a limitless web where every single thing conditions everything else, and there is no independent agent acting, who exactly is the you that is putting down the map?
That is the beautiful, unanswerable question that points straight to suchness.
Something for you to mull over as you navigate your own centerless cycle today. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, keep questioning the map and enjoy the territory.